Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm thrilled to have back on the podcast with me, Steve Shapiro. We've talked previously about his lens theory of innovation, and he's just come out with a new book called Invisible Solutions. So, Stephen, we're going to talk about new ways of thinking about innovation, and it's great to have you back on the show.
Oh, it's fantastic to be back. Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, you and I had a quick chat before we kicked off, and if you're listening to this episode in the future, it is now March of 2020, and the world has gone full-blown crazy with coronavirus. We were just talking about how both of us have been affected by the current situation. What's happening in your world as far as the coronavirus goes?
Well, I have made most of my living as a keynote speaker, and when people aren't holding events, there aren't a lot of events for keynote speakers. So I'm basically every day getting calls saying we're postponing or canceling an event. So that's what's happening right now in my world. It's a frustration, but it's also an opportunity. And I'm trying to take advantage of it and look at it through the lens of an opportunity.
I mean, in my case, I'm working for a large incubator in Germany, and we had our first case of coronavirus in the office last week. And what that means is everyone's now working from home. Unfortunately, being a sort of incubator software development company, everyone has the ability to work remotely and collaborate. We're doing a lot more work over Slack and over Zoom and Google Hangouts. It's a bit different than working face to face with someone, though.
It is totally different. I do find when we're trying to do an exchange of ideas, as great as it is to be on Zoom and have conversations, it's still not the same thing as sitting in front of a whiteboard and looking at each other and having a great conversation.
Have you found this that this has happened sort of in other companies? I know you've got a lot of case studies in this book that you've just come out with, and I remember back in the early 2000s, everyone thought that the internet's going to revolutionize the way that everyone works. No one's going to have to travel anymore. Everything can be done remotely. What's your view on why that didn't necessarily happen, and whether or not it's going to happen in the future?
Well, I think as you point out, people still want to have, whether it's a handshake or a fist bump or an elbow bump, whatever we're supposed to be doing these days, there's still something about a face-to-face conversation that is different than doing something virtually. So we're going to gravitate towards what's natural because let's face it, as human beings, we're still wired to operate the way we've operated for, thousands of years, which is in tribes and being with people. And so there's a lot of this instinctual elements which are built into how we're wired, and those are difficult to change.
So let's talk about your book. I know you've previously written books on the subject of innovation around why best practices aren't necessarily the best way to think about innovation. What's different with your new book? What's it about?
So the last book was Best Practices Are Stupid, and that was really sort of a broad brush view on innovation and how do we create a culture of innovation. And there was one part of the book which was focused on the importance of asking better questions as a means of driving better solutions. And people sort of gravitated towards that content. That book told you why it was important and basically conceptually what to do, but it didn't give you the how. So pretty much as soon as the manuscript was submitted, I started working on a toolkit that was designed to help people not just talk about the importance of it, but actually giving you a process and a set of tools to help you reframe problems. And so I've been working on this for 10 years now, and eventually I decided to just put it out as a book, as well as some digital platforms and other types of ways of delivering the content.
I'm sure this it wasn't just 10 years of working behind closed doors. I know
No.
from your history, this is probably battle hardened with clients and has had a lot of feedback already.
That was the whole point, is I didn't want to produce a book that was based on theory and concepts. I wanted to be real world stories, real world experiences, and proving that this does actually transform an organization. We have a lot of, even things that aren't in the book, we know that applying these concepts has accelerated innovation at a tenfold pace over traditional methods in a lot of our clients. So that was really important to me.
So let's talk about these methods in this toolkit. What sort of things are there? Is it all design thinking and brainstorming exercises, or what sort of things are in the invisible solutions?
Yeah, so the subtitle of the book is 25 Lenses that Reframe and Help Solve Difficult Business Problems. And so it is all about the lenses. So it's not a toolkit per se, it's a tool. And it's basically 25 different ways to reframe a problem. And I sort of took a page from Mark Twain, who basically said that what we need is a mental kaleidoscope. And a mental kaleidoscope is something where you just sort of turn it and we get a different view of the world. And that was sort of his perspective. There's nothing new. We're just using the same pieces of colored glass, but we just keep on turning them. So these 25 lenses are just different ways to turn a problem statement into a different problem statement as a means of developing new solutions. Is it based on design thinking? Sure. I mean, obviously we have to have the customer in mind and all of that, but it is not it's not a specific range of tools. It is one specific tool designed to help you reframe.
And what do you mean when you're talking about lenses? I mean, it makes sense to think about problems from a different angle, but let's talk about something a bit more concrete that the listeners can maybe get their heads around. So what's an example of a lens, and how would you use it to think about innovation and questions?
Sure. So uh, one of the examples that I love from the book is it's a group called Pumps and Pipes, and that is using the analogy lens. And the analogy lens basically says if you're trying to solve a problem, ask yourself who else has solved a similar problem. So in this case, even though when you think about Pumps and Pipes, which are cardiologists who get together on a regular basis with people from the gas and oil pipeline industry, they don't sound like they have much in common. But in fact, they both are solving the same sets of problems, which is how do we move a fluid through a tube? And so my favorite example from Pumps and Pipes is actually how a cardiologist was struggling with a problem and he looked to an oil pipeline engineer for a solution. Now, to me, it sounds a little crazy. I think it's an awesome example. And basically what happened was this cardiologist said, hey, one of the problems we have as human beings is we get clots. And if we have a blood clot and the blood clot goes to the brain, we can have a stroke, it can cause death, it can cause heart attacks, but we don't have a way of filtering out and breaking up clots. How do we do that? And so he's having a conversation with this oil pipeline engineer. He said, we have that problem all the time. We don't call them clots, we call it sludge. And sludge is basically when there's dirt and muck and other types of things in the pipeline that basically clogs the pipeline. And he developed a filter that goes inside of oil pipelines to capture and break up this sludge. They use the same technology, the same concept to create something that goes inside of human beings. And they created something called the Greenfield Vena Cava filter, which actually breaks up clots in the human body. And I love this example because it just shows us there are great solutions everywhere. We just need to ask ourselves who else has solved a similar problem elsewhere. And that's the analogy lens.
Is this something that's already inside people with coronary problems, or is it still?
Yes. No, I actually did a speech just last month. Somebody came up to me and said, I'm alive because of this. Because he had so many clots and they couldn't control it and blood thinners weren't working that they put this filter in his body and it saved his life. So this has been going on for a while. This is actually just a really cool, and there's so many examples like this, but I love this one because it seems like such an odd pairing of groups to find such an incredible solution.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating pairing of groups, but how do you get those groups together? It sounds like this is now a set of groups that meets regularly, but does this rely on one doctor at one point thinking who else has had this challenge and taking up contact with an oil pipeline engineer and it growing from there, or do you get a group of cardiologists and all think who are all thinking, which other people deal with pipeline problems, and let's speak to a group of oil pipeline engineers at a formal conference or something?
Yeah, so I mean, it happens all different ways. This particular one was formed by a group of cardiologists who decided to get together with the gas pipeline engineers. They hold this event in Houston, Texas, uh, every year. Plus, they have offshoot events. But when I think about some other examples, there's an insurance company that I was working with that was trying to find a way of creating transparency in the claims process. Because if you were to file a claim, a lot of times you wouldn't know who the adjuster is, when they're going to show up, how much money you're getting. So it's like this black hole. So they found the solution when they asked who else created transparency in their process. And they got the solution from Domino's Pizza, which is a pizza delivery company. You know when the pizza's in the oven, the name of the person, the name of the driver, everything. And they're like, this is brilliant. And so they created a claims tracker that is built around the way Domino's does their pizza tracker. So there are just solutions everywhere. We just have to ask the question, who else has solved a similar problem, not in our industry, not in our area of expertise? And that's just one of the 25 lenses.
So that's called the analogy lens.
That's the analogy lens, yes.
What other lenses are there?
So we tend to ask questions in one of two ways. We either ask questions that are too abstract, or we ask questions that are too specific. Let's talk about an abstract question so I can use a couple of lenses here. So we're doing some work with the UK government, and we're asked to find a way of improving the education system. And so there's like so many different factors: teachers pay, classroom size, infrastructure, technology, nutrition. Look, there's a long, long list. So if we were to try to solve the problem, how do we improve the education system? Used was the result lens. Why do we care? What is this trying to produce? What's the purpose of an education system? Well, the purpose of an education system isn't education system. It's actually a child's learning. So the question was reframed to that. How do we improve a child's learning? And then from there, positive parental involvement. So the question went from education system to children's learning to positive parental involvement. And when positive parental involvement was the question, a solution was found in a matter of weeks in Bogota, Colombia, that yielded a very practical solution. So you use multiple lenses in many cases to take the original statement and sort of that mental kaleidoscope, keep on turning it.
So that's the example of a very abstract question. We talk a lot about finding the right questions, and surely being more specific would lead to sort of easier to define solutions for innovative challenges. But you're saying that you shouldn't be too specific.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably one of the most powerful examples, I think, is where the question was originally too specific, and in the process of making it less so, a solution was found. And this goes back to 1989. It's an old example, but it's a powerful example. 1989, Exxon Valdes oil tanker crashes into Prince William Sound in Alaska. Cleanup crews are trying to basically suck out the oil water mixture from Prince William Sound, but there were two problems. One is it was an enclosed sound, so the oil had nowhere to dissipate. And the other one is the temperatures were below freezing, so every time they tried to extract the oil water mixture, it would freeze. So they spent nearly 2 decades, from 1989 to 2007, trying to solve the problem, how can we prevent an oil water mixture from freezing? And they didn't get anywhere with that. So eventually what they did was, in 2007, they partnered with a nonprofit called the Oil Spill Recovery Institute, who worked with a crowdsourcing platform called Innocentive. And the scientists who looked at the problem said, this is not an oil problem. This is not a temperature problem. This is a common fluid dynamics problem called viscous shearing. And all viscous shearing means is that dense liquids that are put under force or acceleration start to act like a solid. So when they asked the question, how do we prevent viscous shearing from occurring in a dense liquid? It didn't take 2 decades and millions of dollars. They found a solution in 6 weeks for $20,000. And the solution was provided by a guy whose name is John Davis. He's a chemist who worked in the construction industry. And the problem he was working on is, how do we prevent cement chutes from clogging? That is basically viscous shearing. And he has this device that vibrates the molecules. And he took his device that is used to prevent cement chutes from seizing, from clogging, and he brought it to Alaska, made some minor modifications, and he solved a 2-decade-old problem. The only reason the problem was solved is because they changed the question. They changed the question, and in changing the question, it opened up new places to look. It was no longer about oil experts, but rather as anybody who deals with dense liquids.
It's an interesting word you use there, experts. Often, the more successful companies are, the more they try to develop their expertise. But quite often, expertise can actually end up harming your innovation efforts if you become too focused on doing things the way that you were taught back when you were learning your domain of expertise.
Spot on. I mean, I always say that expertise is the enemy of innovation. And part of it is the more you know about a topic, the harder it is for you to think differently about it. And unfortunately, what happens is when you are an expert, the past becomes the future. Our past experiences, our past understandings are what we use to make decisions in the future. But unfortunately, the world is different today. So if you apply the same lenses to tomorrow's business that you used for yesterday's business, you're going to be out of business. And so it's so critical to keep on questioning. Like one of the lenses in the book is the real business lens. Like, what business are you really in? You know, Kodak thought that they were in the film business, but if you think you're in the film business, you're not going to think about digital cameras. Maybe they were in the capturing and sharing moments business. Different business opens up new opportunities.
I think I can't remember exactly which sequence of products it was, but the person who invented BIC, the large plastics manufacturer, I can't remember if they started off with shaving blades or with lighters, but at one point, or with pens. But those were three of their most popular products, and at the beginning they only had one of them, and they thought they were in the, let's say it was razors. They thought we're in the razors business, and that's why we're so good at producing these mass manufactured incredibly cheap razors. And at some point one of their leaders said, no, we're not in the razors business, we're in the cheap plastics business, and what can we use our expertise in to make new products using our differentiator, our USP. And that's how they ended up really expanding their product line and becoming successful against a lot of different products. If anyone's listening to the podcast and knows exactly which product they started with, write it down in the comments below, because I'm interested in that story as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. And what I'd love to do is build on what you just said and use one of the other lenses, which is um, so we know about synonyms, which are basically words that are of the same level of value. Well, a hypernym is a word that is a higher level of value. And so take Tyson Foods, which is a company, second largest producer of poultry products. And, you know, they always thought that they were in the meat business. Now, the meat business, if you look at a hypernym for Chihuahua, hypernym for dog would be animal. So just, you can see it's higher levels of abstraction. Well, if they think they're in the meat business, they're only going to think about poultry and beef and pork. But somebody suggested to them, well, we're not in the meat business, we're in the protein business. Okay, well, if we're in the protein business, it doesn't mean it has to do anything with animals. We're now in proteins. And so they've launched 2 new product lines around non-animal protein-based seafoods and shrimp and things of that nature, vegan chicken McNuggets, essentially. But it's a different question. And it has shifted the way that they think about their business. We can change one word in the problem, and it now will completely change the way we see it.
In your experience, because I know you've done a lot of client workshops to help them find different ways of figuring out which lens to use in which situation, what are the main sort of triggers that make leadership get it to think in different ways? What gets them stuck in their cycle of not finding the right question? And then what are the situations that finally change their perspective?
Yeah, as you know, most people think they have the answers. And I think that's the problem. Leaders feel like they're supposed to have the answers, but having the answers is not the answer. We need to make sure that as leaders, we're creating other leaders. And the way we create leaders in our organization is to actually not give them answers, but to ask them questions that stimulates the rest of the organization to ask questions. And this process of asking questions is the key to creating agility and adaptability inside of organizations. So it's this belief that we have to have the answers to be able to have our ego. I'm the expert. I'm like coming back to the expert. I'm supposed to have the answers, but that's not the way organizations change. The way organizations change is by getting everybody to be contributing. And I don't like the word innovation. One thing which you'll find interesting is if you look at the cover of the book, the word innovation is not on there anywhere by design. Because I think some people think of innovation as a bunch of people sitting on high mountains wearing long white robes, handing down the gospel for the future. And it's not the way it is. You know how this works. The more we can get everybody involved in formulating and solving problems, the more likely we are to be able to move the organization forward in the right direction.
Steve, it's been wonderful speaking with you. I always enjoy having our conversations. If people want to find out more about your book or your work, what's the best way they can find out more?
The best place is just to go to invisible-solutionsbook.com, invisible-solutionsbook.com. There's videos and a whole bunch of other materials that will help you get started with your innovation journey.
Perfect. I'll make sure to get the link down in the description below. Steve, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders, and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they're backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.